Hey guys, Tonic here. Today I want to talk about some legendary effects that I think need a buff. Since the beginning of the game, bloodied and junkied weapons have pretty much dominated the market and just been the most sought after and valuable items besides legacies, but I think it'd be really neat if some of the effects that no one really uses got a little bit of a buff. This would allow for all different types of builds and in general just sort of switch up the current meta a little bit. Firstly, I want to talk about the Mutants weapons. The effect for mutant weapons, as we all know, is plus 10% damage if you're mutated, but even with that effect, usually everyone just turns these in for script or tries to sell them right away because they don't really compare to bloodied or junkied or even anti-armor weapons in terms of damage. I think the best way to actually make this effect somewhat viable would be to change the effect to make it plus 10% damage per mutation up to 5. This way with 5 mutations you could have a plus 50% damage boost, and just doing that simple fix would actually have this weapon put up decent damage numbers and open the possibility for builds focused around this effect. Next up, let's talk about the Nocturnal weapons. The Nocturnal weapons are very notorious for being the worst possible thing that you can get on a weapon, but I think with a little bit of tweaking this could actually be a somewhat viable weapon and not instantly be scripted by everyone that gets it. Now the legendary effect for these Nocturnal weapons is going to be that during the nighttime the damage is increased and during the daytime the damage is decreased. So during the nighttime these weapons are actually very hard hitting weapons. During the peak of the night, because it does gradually go up as the sun starts to set, it is a 65% damage increase, which is a very hard hitting weapon, and it's kind of just misunderstood. A lot of people don't know that it actually does that much damage, but during the night they are very strong weapons. So I think the best possible option for this weapon to become viable would just be to remove that negative drawback of the daytime, just have it go to be a normal fixer during the day and an absolute beast during the nighttime, because right now during the daytime it actually does drop below base damage, so you're better off having a non-legendary fixer during the day than you are having a Nocturnal fixer during the day. So this solution would not make it the best legendary weapon by any means or even comparable to some other legendary weapons, but it would still add a lot more value to it and at least make it somewhat viable in certain situations. Now let's talk about the Berserker effect. The Berserker effect is actually a thing that a lot of people have been wanting to be buffed for a very long time. It's a really cool idea, just having more damage the lower damage resistance you have. So it's pretty much essentially meant to turn you into a glass cannon where you run around pretty much in just your underwear and put out the heaviest damage imaginable, but in reality, even if you are just down to absolutely no armor pieces, you only put out a measly 50% damage. And sure, the 50% damage bonus is extremely nice, especially when you compare it to other legendary effects. It's actually up there in some of the highest damage bonuses that you can get. However, it's just not really worth it. When you look at the bloodied weapons, it's an extremely similar perk. It's going to be that the lower your health is, the more damage you put out, but that damage scale actually maxes at about 95. Plus you can get the adrenal reaction, which is going to make it even bigger, and you have your unyielding armor pieces that are going to help out, and on top of that there's a lot of perk cards that are going to help out a bloodied build. When it comes to the Berserker build, there really isn't too much bonus things that you can add on to it to make it a very viable thing. So I think the best option to make the Berserker effect actually decent is just to raise that damage cap to 200%. I think that it should be absolutely up there with the highest damage possible, because again, you're not going to be able to wear armor pieces, so you can't have your weapon weight reduction perks, you can't have your extra stealth bonus perks. You're going to have absolutely nothing going for you. You're going to be just bare naked running around with like a fixer putting out some crazy damage and getting absolutely destroyed by any attack that hits you. And I think that that would just be a lot of fun. I think that that might be the most fun build possible in the entire game if it was somewhat viable. There are people that do try and attempt it now, but they quickly change back to other builds because it's just not worth doing. You get destroyed quickly, and the damage you put out isn't even comparable to when you run around with like an anti-armor weapon and some Chinese stealth armor. So I really hope that they buff this one, because if they do, I would happily partake in trying to make some builds for this thing. It seems like there's a lot of potential there, and it would just again be an absolute blast trying this out. So I really hope that they buff that. Now the next effect I want to talk about is actually going to be several effects kind of clumped into one, and it's going to be the Hunters, Exterminators, Ghoul Slayers, Mutant Slayers, and Troubleshooters effects. All these effects are going to grant you extra 30% damage towards the respective enemy of that effect, so like a Hunters will be animals, Mutant Slayers, Super Mutants, and so on and so forth. But this idea is actually not my own. This idea comes from a user over on Reddit by the name of Outstanding Dirt. So the idea that they came up with is absolutely brilliant. I would have never thought of this. Pretty much it's going to add a material gain on top of the damage bonus to these weapons. So for example, the Hunter's weapon would yield more meat and leather, Exterminators more meat and insect parts, the Ghoul Slayers more blood packs and junk, the Mutant Slayers more bone, meat, and gunpowder, and the Troubleshooters more scrap, steel, and lead. I think that that is a great way to actually make these somewhat decent, because you would actually be able to take these weapons out there on farming runs. If you, for example, want to go to the Mutant Slayer's place, you can go out there, just grind it out, get a ton of gunpowder plus your XP on top of that when you go to West Tech. For Ghoul Slayers, you can go through White Springs and get a ton of blood packs to go and craft some stim packs and things. If they added this, I would definitely try and hunt down a nice troubleshooter's weapon and take it with me to encrypted events or AWOL armaments and just try and farm as much steel nut as possible, because I am always on the hunt for it and I know a lot of people are. It would add an entire new layer onto the trading market where people try and get the best farming weapons, and overall I just think it'd be a great simple addition to make these weapons actually decent and stay in a lot of people's inventories. That is pretty much all of the legendary weapon effects that I do think need a buff. However, there are still some pretty weak ones like medics and suppressors, but they do serve their own purpose as being a support weapon, so I don't really think a buff is justified there. Now, if you think that any of this is actually out of the realm of possibility, it really isn't. The most recent one that Bethesda has actually changed was the Assassin's one. That one used to only do plus 10 damage to other players, but late last year it was actually recently changed to include damage to other humans, so that involves NPCs, whether it be raiders or blood eagles or settlers, whatever you name it, the weapon will do plus damage to them, which is a super cool addition. And sure, that buff is not amazing by any means, it's actually still not a very good roll. However, it does add a little bit more versatility to this weapon, and that's really what we're going for here. We just want these weapons to be a little bit better than they already are, because a lot of these just don't really have a use for much. A lot of people don't like them, a lot of people don't really use them, but if we do add just a few more things on there, they actually can become somewhat decent weapons, and there would be a lot more interesting things that you could do with them. And now I want to directly ask you, what effect would you buff, if any at all? Some of these weapon effects, people might not even think that they need a buff, and some people actually might think that they need more of a buff than I talked about. But when discussing this, it is important to note that you don't want to make things too overpowered and overshadow all these other effects that already exist in game, and also you don't want to make them worse than they already are, because that would just set us even farther back. But with all that being said, I do want to say a massive thank you for sticking around and watching this video, and as always, a massive thank you to all the channel members: Death93, Heather Henderson, Jaden James, Blackburn, Yosevated, Patrick Ruda, 23 Icefire, Jay Smith, Argent Deer, Bowser Double Frang, Ice Cream Manny, Chris Decker, Robert Kennard, Theodore, Captain Awesome, Digital Aardvark, Lone Samurai OG, Diathan Gaming, Christy Mel, and Schwitz. You guys are amazing. I love you guys, and have a good weekend.